Hello, bonjour. Nous faisons partie du groupe de travail du bureau du Conseil privé pour une nouvelle politique de sécurité nationale. Je m'appelle Elina et Senga, Hannah et Amanda vous guideront en anglais au cours des prochaines parties de notre présentation. Notre projet pour la stratégie de sécurité nationale du Canada s'intitule Sécurité et prospérité pour un Canada résilient. Next slide, please. Notre réflexion pour la stratégie de sécurité s'est basée sur le constat qu'il y a une rupture et que le Canada a basculé dans un monde incertain. Alors que le Canada a toujours pu bénéficier de la certitude d'une géographie protectrice ainsi que d'un allié de confiance au sud, le retour de la rivalité entre puissances et l'instabilité croissante dans l'Arctique, ainsi que la montée de l'hypernationalisme, ont transformé son environnement sécuritaire en une réalité marquée par une incertitude profonde. Cette nouvelle réalité menace la sécurité des Canadiens, tant sur le territoire national qu'à l'étranger, et souligne l'urgence d'une nouvelle stratégie nationale de sécurité globale. C'est donc une situation sans précédent et plus que jamais, il paraît désormais nécessaire de définir une stratégie de sécurité. Next slide, please. In order to present this new security strategy, we are first going to expose the current situation of the world. Then we will present our response through our strategy. Senga will analyze the different threats in the field of economic security. Anna, the conventional security, and Amanda, the threats to sovereignty. For each of these, we will suggest concrete and high-level solutions to mitigate the uncertainty. Our strategy will restore stability by protecting Canada's economic resilience, strengthening conventional deterrence, and safeguarding sovereignty in the digital and domestic domain with a whole of Canada approach. We will finish by the next steps to implement in the field of communication. Next slide, please. We need to implement this strategy urgently because of the world that we live in. We live in an increasingly uncertain world, marked by global competition between great powers. Changes in the world order have led to less respect for international law and global organizations. The economy is increasingly used as a tool of power, of pressure. Climate change is affecting routes such as the Northwest Passage and the use of military forces in emergencies. Technological changes also transform the field of conflict. Canada's national security framework includes multiple strategic documents, such as the National Defense Policy, the Arctic Foreign Policy, the Indo-Pacific Strategy, and the National Cybersecurity Strategy. Just this week, Canada released the Defense Industrial Strategy, highlighting how relevant these topics have become in today's context. Next slide, please.
In 2004, Canada's national security strategy focused on border protection and counterterrorism. Today, the threat landscape has evolved, and so must our strategy. As Alina emphasized, Canada is operating in a far more competitive and uncertain global order. In that environment, economic strength is no longer just about prosperity. It is a core pillar of national security where we are faced by many threats. First, our economy is extremely concentrated, where about 3/4 of our exports go to the United States. Now, while that has been fruitful relationship in the past, it also means that we're structurally exposed. Second, the global trading system is weakening. The World Trade Organization's dispute system is stalled. Trade rules are less enforceable. Countries are turning inward. Third, the United States has openly linked trade and national security under an America First framework. Protectionism is normalized. And CUSMA is up for review in 2026 under Article 34.7. Now, even uncertainty around this strategy can create instability for both investors and markets. In this environment, Economic security is no longer just about growth. It is about resilience, and it is about leverage. And like the other priorities that we'll be presenting a bit later in the strategies, it requires a whole of Canada approach, aligning diplomacy, trade policy, industrial policy, and federal provincial coordination. And this brings me to our two recommendations for the economic security pillar. Expansion of international trade and expansion of domestic trade. Let me begin with international. The 2026 CUSMA review is critical. Rather than relying solely on executive diplomacy, we formalize a congressional engagement strategy. And this would be following Ambassador Alan Gottlieb's approach, targeting key US states that are deeply integrated with Canada. Our policy instruments include enhanced diplomatic programming within Global Affairs Canada, structured state-level economic mapping, expanded trade commissioner presence in strategic US regions. Our estimated cost for this is $50 million annually. Second, we accelerate diversification beyond US, particularly in the EU and Indo-Pacific. Our policy instruments include expansion of the Trade Commissioner Service, targeted SME export readiness program in strategic sectors, strategic alignment with the existing $5 billion Trade Corridors Fund. This builds on Budget 2025, but sharpens focus towards strategic market penetration. Estimated cost, $250 million annually. Now, we've witnessed that trade is increasingly weaponized, and sectors like AI, critical minerals, and energy require enhanced scrutiny. So we recommend Investment Canada Act modernization. Our policy instruments for this include lower review thresholds under the existing Investment Canada Act, expanded national security review capacity within ISED, and for this, no new legislation is required, as ministerial regulatory authority already exists. Estimated cost is 30 to 40 million annually. And now let me turn focus to domestic expansion. International diversification must be matched by domestic resilience. Interprovincial trade barriers are no longer just inefficiencies. They weaken shock absorption capacity. So we recommend Canadian Free Trade Agreement modernization. Policy instruments that we recommend are accelerated regulatory harmonization under the CFTA and creation of Federal Provincial Coordination Secretariat, conditional federal incentives tied to measurable barrier reduction. And for this, we use federal spending power, so no new bureaucracy is required. Estimated allocation, estimated cost, we've estimated 75 million annually for the coordination piece and 125 million annually in conditional incentives. In total, our strategy requires approximately $500 million a year. And by strategy, I mean the security pillar of our strategy. Budget 2025 already allocates roughly 1.5 billion annually toward trade diversification and economic shock response. Our proposal represents roughly 35% of current trade-related allocations, and that also accounts for less than 2% of the recent annual defense increase. The February 17 Defense Industrial Update reinforced that economic capacity and national security are strategically linked. And our proposal operationalizes that principle on the trade front. So we're not reinventing Canada's economy. Rather, we are recommending to modernize existing economic tools with the whole of Canada approach that recognizes economic resilience as national security. Next slide, please.
As Sangha mentioned, resiliency is essential for our economy, and it is just as critical for our conventional security. We are now operating in an era where three major threats are placing real pressure on Canada's ability to remain resilient in its conventional security. That is why this is our second strategy priority. The first threat is the return of great power conflict. State-on-state war is no longer hypothetical. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and China's rapid military expansion remind us that conventional warfare still defines global power. For Canada, the Arctic is the main avenue through which long-range missiles, hypersonic weapons, and strategic bombers could approach North America. So, great power competition directly affects our conventional security in ways we no longer can ignore. The second threat, closely linked to the first, is accelerating Arctic competition. The Arctic is warming nearly 4 times faster than the global average. That means new shipping routes, more foreign activity, and expanding resource access. As these waters open, protecting Canada's sovereignty over the Northwest Passage becomes increasingly critical. Yet, Canada's surveillance systems are aging, maritime tracking is inconsistent, and responsibilities remain fragmented. These vulnerabilities create openings for gray zone activity, actions that fall below traditional thresholds of conflict but still undermine our sovereignty. The third threat is climate change, which acts as a threat multiplier. Permafrost melt is weakening our runways and radar sites, extreme weather is increasing the pressure on the Canadian Armed Forces, and receding ice is opening more navigable waters, again, expanding opportunities for foreign military and commercial presence. Climate change intersects with every other threat that we face. To action these threats, we recommend the following policy implementations. First, to address the great power rivalry, Canada must strengthen early warning and deterrence. That means modernizing NORAD with layered Arctic detection systems. It also means accelerating our procurement through the new Defense Investment Agency, so we acquire high priority capabilities quickly. And closer alignment with NATO improves the interoperability and collective deterrence in the high north. Second, we must secure our Arctic sovereignty. An integrated ISR network across air, surface, and subsurface will close surveillance gaps as well as mandated vessel tracking. A national Arctic fusion center will streamline information and shorten response times. Additionally, strengthening the Canadian Rangers ensures a persistent community-based presence in remote regions. And more cooperation with NATO's Arctic Sentry will expand shared situational awareness. Third, Canada must build climate resilience. We need to upgrade northern bases, communications, and sensors to function in harsher conditions. We should lead environmental and security monitoring aligned with NATO's Climate Action Plan. And finally, embed climate risk and emergency response directly into our defense planning. In terms of funding, Canada has already committed $470 billion over the next 10 years through the Defense Industrial Strategy, alongside its pledge to NATO to reach 5% of GDP in defense spending in 2035. From within this existing budget, our conventional security strategy allocates $188 billion over the next 4 years, so approximately $47 billion annually. To break it down further, over the next 4 years, roughly $116 billion goes to infrastructure, and $72 billion will go to targeted procurement. Importantly, we achieve all of this within the established envelope. Ultimately, these investments reinforce Canada's defense industrial base, strengthen military readiness, and ensure our capabilities keep pace with our commitments. But security isn't just a defense responsibility. It requires a whole of Canada approach. Canadians need to understand both the urgency and the importance of protecting our conventional security in an increasingly uncertain world. Next slide, please.
Canadian resiliency is even more at stake because of the complexities which threaten national sovereignty. Amid the climate change crisis, Canada is warming at twice the global rate, and this rapid heating is accelerating Arctic sea ice melt, thereby making Canadian waterways, including the Northwest Passage, increasingly accessible for navigation, which exacerbates uncertainty around Canadian geostrategic Arctic sovereignty, given the interest of international players in Arctic territory. Simultaneously, new and emerging technologies are propagating disinformation among Canadians, and as a result of foreign espionage or interference, which has been outlined in the Hogue Report. This manipulation deepens national polarization, leading to events of ideologically motivated extremism and the erosion of democratic resilience, demonstrating a serious threat to digital information and democratic sovereignty. In response to these emerging threats, we recommend embedding a pillar of sovereignty security response in Canada's new national security policy, a pillar which would rest on two central objectives. First, the establishment of an Arctic sovereignty and strategic intelligence framework that formalizes Canada's legal claims on the Arctic in relation to Canadian borders. This framework would also provide avenues for building strong relationships with Indigenous communities to integrate their knowledge and leadership into Arctic governance and preserve the land. To address concerns surrounding funding espionage and international threats to Canada's Arctic, this framework also requires maintaining a specialized unit within CSE or CSIS to specifically search for and respond to threats targeting Northern assets. In response to the threats against digital information and democratic sovereignty, we recommend measures that critically build upon the foundation outlined in Canada's 2004 National Security Policy. Through establishing a national cyber protection and resilience framework that includes baseline security standards for digital infrastructure, integration of rapid response teams for cyber incidents, and formalized legal protections in the vein of the EU's AI Act, the federal government would effectively institutionalize strong protections for Canadians at home and abroad. Finally, we recommend developing independent fact-checking, media literacy, and democratic protection programs to counter disinformation, reduce polarization, and bolster democratic participation. These measures, like those already outlined, would embody a whole of Canada approach, in which an independent, nonpartisan alliance of journalists, academics, and civil society groups remain committed to fact-checking and debunking false narratives quickly. This would create channels for civil society to remain engaged with the private sector and the government communications, and reduce disconnect between these parties. Further, the government can provide grants to support grassroots democratic participation, thereby building trust in Canadian institutions and relations. As Hannah discussed, Canada's newly unveiled Defence Industrial Strategy outlines a commitment of approximately $470 billion to defence and security-related procurement and capital investment over the next decade, which roughly equates to $45 to $50 billion annually. For the sovereignty security pillar, we recommend a budgeted cost of $2.4 billion over 4 years, or $500 to $750 million annually. We are not recommending additional funding, but rather for alignment and prioritization within an already existing budget. For less than 2% of annual defense and security spending, Canada can secure both its territory and its democracy. Therefore, the total cost of economy, defense, and sovereignty for a resilient Canada amounts to $192.5 billion distributed over 4 years. Next slide, please. Given that we recommend the embodiment of a whole of Canada approach, it is critical that all of Canada remains knowledgeable of and engaged with this policy framework. As such, should the government adopt our policy, we recommend deploying a communication strategy before, during, and after the minutiae and logistics of the policy are designed and implemented. This strategy embodies 3 central goals, the first being to inform. The significance of maintaining accessible and transparent information channels between the civic, private, and government sectors cannot be understated. By explaining the threats to the public and outlining the measures taken in the national security strategy, we will bolster social cohesion through directly countering the ability of disinformation narratives to take hold. Our second goal is to reassure. It is essential that the government demonstrates that it has a clear plan and strategy to showcase that it can lead with certainty for all of Canada. We all saw Prime Minister Carney's speech in Davos and felt the impact of leadership maintaining a strong stance within an uncertain world. Therefore, we recommend incorporating strong leadership communications on a national scale in order to increase legitimacy and reassure Canadians that steps are being taken. Finally, our goal is to mobilize. By mobilizing citizens and public support through education programs and feedback channels, this communication strategy will foster resiliency to foreign interference and disinformation in the borderless information environment. This ultimately demonstrates the significance of maintaining a whole of Canada approach at all levels of the national security policy. Next slide, please.
Ainsi, notre projet de stratégie de sécurité nationale, qui inclut toute la société canadienne, permettrait de réduire les incertitudes dans les domaines de sécurité
Merci,
économique.
Glendon. Je dois vous interrompre. Nous avons maintenant dépassé le 20 minutes. Thank you very much. We've gone over the 20 minutes, and we will now proceed to the Q&A.
Thank you so much. I congratulate you. It's hard to be the first and it's hard to be the last, and it's a long day for you guys. And it's obviously put just a ton of work into this, and it's really wonderful to see how well you've collaborated. And it's always amazing to see the level of participation that there can be, and it's very, very heartening. I will pass the question to Christina Santini, and Christina has on a panel of expertise in communications and public engagement.
Thank you very much. So my key question is with regards to this, when you were developing your plan and proposing the options and going forward, how did you take into account or consider different stakeholder interests? How did you end up weighing them? And how would your communication messaging end up being tailored for different audiences? So example, think public, business, specific subgroups, etc. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for this question. This is a really important consideration to have within a strategy like this, and specifically within the communication strategy component. From the get-go, we decided that we were going to embody a whole of Canada approach, because with the uncertainty that Canada is facing, it was intrinsically necessary to maintain an approach that integrated the government with civic society and with business actors. Therefore, stakeholders were always at the center of this strategy's development. We also understand that there are going to be internal and external stakeholders in this when we think about governance structures and the interdepartmental coordination between offices like Global Affairs Canada or CSIS or the Department of National Defense. Communication channels have to exist in one way with them, and also in a different way when it comes to businesses and civil society. The importance and what's central to the communication strategy is making sure that communications are low barrier, that they reflect what is happening, what the concerns are, and that they also speak to what is at the heart of the concerns of these different stakeholders. That's why it was also really important to integrate feedback channels, because without feedback channels, without the policy experts having an understanding and a continuing conversation with stakeholders about what issues are most important to them, communications are going to fall to the wayside. So therefore, the communication strategy is in and of itself about responding to all of Canada from start to end and maintaining that ongoing process.
Thank you.
I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Craig, on our panel with expertise in interprovincial and international relations.
Thanks, Noah, and thanks to the team for the presentation and walking us through those three priorities in the detail you did. My question really is perhaps if you could zero in on a couple concrete ways in which you would be engaging with the provinces and territories in pursuing the actions that you've identified. On the one hand, so provinces and territories, how you might work with them in which specific ways. And then if you could also do the same on the international side, are there international partners with which Canada would need to link up with in order to advance this vision?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I'll start with international. In our presentation, in our notes, I alluded to the strategy of engaging international partners, specifically on the trade front, reaching out to Congress, for instance, and building relationship that way. So that is a strong strategy to negotiate during the CUSMA renegotiation process. Reaching out to, and also the strategy proposes reaching out to the new markets that we want to navigate, the new trade routes that we want to open up with EU and also Indo-Pacific markets. The strategy proposes to engage Global Affairs Canada in reaching out those diplomatic fronts and to leverage those relationships that way. In terms of the domestic trade, we are proposing a strong relationship building within the provinces by providing incentives to work with one another. We're also proposing the secretariat that will enhance the relationship within the governments, within the trades, expanding trades within domestic capacities. We are not asking for extra funds to be directed here or to be allocated, but we are asking to redirect existing funds to strengthen this strategy. So regional negotiations will be incredibly important in this regards. The infrastructure funds can help with that. Political distribution, for instance, is incredibly important to negotiate within the provinces and also externally.
Yeah, thank you.
And if I may add something about the coordination between the different provinces, it's also a strategy that calls for a strong leadership, and it is urgent that we implement that. So considering that, I think that the coordination would be made easier by a strong leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is going to likely be the last question. I'm going to pass it to Violetta.
Thank you. Thanks to this team for their presentation. One question I have for you. You have done a great job identifying the threats up front that led to your the policy choices that you presented. Now, what risks are inherent to your strategy that you would be managing throughout? So there are risks that we would be looking for to manage, to mitigate as you implement the various interventions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Of course, like any other strategy, like any other policy implementation, risks are always, a part of that strategy. And so as we were thinking about the risks, some of the risks that came, up were interdepartmental coordination. For instance, procurement and execution risks. We also thought of fiscal sustainability risks and political intergovernmental resistance, for instance, another risk that we thought of. And we also thought of some strategies to speak to those risks. Whole of government coordination, you probably heard us say that a couple of times, and we thought that is the core element of our strategy. A clear ministerial accountability, for instance, is another way to tackle these intergovernmental coordination risks. For instance, national security advisor oversight, for instance, is needed for this. We also thought that phased contracting and leveraging domestic industrial base, for instance, and independent oversight mechanisms is going to help us mitigate these risks. Priority sequencing within existing capital envelopes. As we alluded to, working with what we have, working with the current budget, but we're realigning it to meet the emerging threats. We also thought of, on the fiscal sustainability risk front, we also thought of, maintaining proportional spending. So around 1.5 to 3%, and that would help us mitigate risk around, operating within existing funding envelopes. Aligning investments with long-term industrial returns would be also our way to mitigate risks as we encounter them or as we're talking about the implementation of the strategy.
And just to add to Sanga's point, There are inherent risks in the fact that we had to make trade-offs in developing this strategy. So in prioritizing these three pillars, though their issues and solutions are intrinsically linked, there are inherent risks in trading off on centering other issues. However, we have designed our strategy to be adaptable. And so in 4 years' time, we can revise the strategy to include these issues and expand upon the solutions. But these are where the most acute need lies.
Very good. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Glendon. Thank you very much.